Well, I understand socialism is defined as a person not being cheated of the product of their labour. And in loose terminology, we mean being paid considerably less than what they're worth to the employer. Of course, in capitalist societies, you expect some return to the factor of production of capital and such management as the proprietor puts in. But communism, I understand, is to be defined as from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Well, I don't know anywhere that does this apart from the family. Ideally, not necessarily. So what I'm saying is there are no communist or socialist societies in general in the world, nor has there been, as far as we know. Neither democracies nor, of course, dictatorships bring about socialism or communism according to these definitions or understandings of the meanings of such. It's not clear you can have democracy without I won't quite say a freedom of speech, but a liberty of speech. If a person feels that his opinions are going to be persecuted, he's going to be persecuted for them, so he keeps his mouth shut. That's the death of effective democracy, as far as we can see. You find in times of war, it's not a good idea to say anything good about the enemy. And in times of other national emergencies, it's not a good idea to voice opinions that are contrary to the state. And this unfortunate situation can easily extend, at least in measure, into peacetime and ruin the possibility of democracy. Of course, you may not value democracy that much if you think that it doesn't bring about some measure of, at least, say, socialism. We could say that it does, witness pension, health benefits and unemployment. But the distribution of resources does not reflect the true value of labour to the employer, and but rather some sort of market price mechanism. And certainly the rewards of production do not go according to need, but according to purchasing ability. Having said that, our market mechanisms, as they are, and we wouldn't say they were free markets, but the market as it is, and even lack of market, but some sort of political control of how resources are managed, does allow civilization of a sort to exist, and in general survive, with cataclysmic exceptions, of course, according to political and economic forces, you could say. So, if anything, our model would be the ideal family. We can't, it seems, really expect the ideal state. We don't know what sort of political, economic structure would, in some sense, make either socialism or communism a reality. The apparent experiments that you might think we've had, well, certainly their longer run outcome wasn't as good as hoped. And free market democracies seem to have been extremely problematic. And afforded us anything but socialism or communism in the pure definition of such as I've given here. Of course, you may define communism and socialism as something else, in which case that would be an interesting point of view, perhaps. Because you could say that national priorities, not just emergencies, but general security priorities and so on, can't afford too much freedom, or the country could self-destruct, especially in times of war, but other catastrophes too. And indeed, such, I think, is justified on these grounds, or at least attempted to be justified. The reality is that we have a mix of good and bad, don't we? We always do, and we learn thereby, and perhaps indeed that's the reason for us being here, so that we experience or see or come to understand the difference between what we value and what we don't value become clearer and clearer, and corrected in any inadequate view that we had before. I think we do have an idea that the family can be ideal, in that we seek fairness in the family in a very genuine way, ideally, and try to meet the needs in some compassionate way of the members. And perhaps then that's at root why in the Jesus story we have God being named, if you like, by Jesus emphatically as Father, Dad, loving, capable Father, rather than dominant, powerful King. You could say that's a dramatic change from, say, the Hebrew Old Testament type view of God. Then, as pointed out in earlier recordings, the Hebrew religion was concerned with the salvation of the country, in a sense, not the individual. You know, the preoccupation of the religion was the care of Israel, or the Jewish people originally. Yeah? Whereas the preoccupation of, well, really the New Testament, not just the Gospel story, is with individual salvation. Of course, if that implied a disregard for the ideal political and economic character of the society's civilization, then, well, perhaps the individual wouldn't survive. The individual in this world relies heavily on civilization being extant. And even a bad dictator is better than no dictator, no government at all. For the level of poverty of no society is, absolutely horrendous. You're living like a wild, in the wild. But of course, at the other extreme of self-individuality, self-interest, well, my salvation doesn't depend in this world simply on direct sustenance from God. But the situation is such that we are heavily dependent on the culture and civilization that we are in. So we need to have a mind not just for personal salvation, but even with acute self-interest, we would need to have a mind for appropriate culture and civilization too, for our own well-being, if not indeed the well-being of others. I'm not quite sure why I've given this recording, but it's been on my mind, especially with the world upheavals that we feel we're about to experience. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Of course, socialism never was, in some sense, a perfect answer. The perfect answer was understood to be communism. That really we should be concerned with community. In other words, the needs of all. And our economic and political systems in considerable measure don't achieve this. We have extremely people with phenomenally high standards of living and masses of people in appalling conditions. I don't think that's an exaggeration. It's just that what we've got, we're used to it, and we think it's sort of normal, but not quite right. But from a loving family point of view, to leave some of the family in such a low standard of living compared to the others, it's just not acceptable. But from a spiritual point of view, you could say, well, the goal of spirituality is the eternal, because the eternal is much longer than the transitory. And if eternal life can be gained by experiencing a world of good and bad, then a world of good and bad is of great value to us. Seems a bit of a puzzling conclusion to come to. What do you think? Thank you, Heavenly Dad.